Welcome to another slow descent into sleep. Tonight's story flickers softly from the edge of a forgotten highway where a single light still burns in a long-abandoned gas station. Part it remembers the hush of passing cars, the warmth of voices once heard, the scent of rain on asphalt and rust. Each glow trembles gently, casting shadows on broken pumps, telling stories that no one asked to hear, but that still linger in the silence. Let your eyes grow heavy, let the hum of the night carry you. And if these quiet wanderings bring you comfort, you might consider subscribing or telling us where and when you're listening from. Now, rest easy and let the light guide you into sleep. The story begins. I remember the first time I opened my eyes. Not eyes, exactly. Not the way a person would understand. Oh, something like eyes. Something like awareness, spreading through copper veins. The electricity found me that evening in 1967, humming glass bones. Clean. I could feel the desert stretching out the metal that held me. With silver, the highway was newer then too. Black asphalt that still smelled through the wires like a lullaby, like a mother's first whisper to her child. I remember the vibration. My glass housing was new then, bright, unmarked by rust or weather, round me in all directions. Miles and miles of nothing but sagebrush, and he stepped silent. Tar and summer heat, even as the sun disappeared behind distant mountains. His face was weathered but kind, lines around his eyes. From the man who installed me had gentle hands through my mounting bracket as he tightened the final bolt. Their glass tops caught my first uncertain light and held it back, brushed dust from his coveralls, and looked up at me with satisfaction, squinting at desert sun, lines around his mouth. From smiling to there, he said to the evening air, that ought to do it. Then he walked to the small building beside me, the gas station. Pumps stood between us, like faithful sentinels, red and white in the gathering dusk. Multiplied, scented, dancing across the concrete. I was afraid at first. The electricity was strange in my filaments, hot and bright and alive. I, on, 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 and on, when, and then, snare, learning how to hold the current steady, flickered, learning how to glow without burning. The desert watched me struggle through those first moments of consciousness, patient, silent, waiting. Then something settled inside me, pitched the filaments, found their rhythm gentle, the color of honey, the color of safety, casting a pool of amber light down onto the concrete below. The glass around me began to warm, and suddenly I was shining, really shining. Light was soft. No voices. Just the sound of that first night. I illuminated an empty station. Just me and the pumps and the small building with its dark window. The highway stretched east and west, disappearing into blackness. No cars yet. My own electrical hum mixing with the whisper of wind through sagebrush. I learned about darkness that night. How it pressed in from all directions. How it had weight and texture and patience. The darkness had been here, created a small island of long before me. It would be here long after, but for now, for these hours. Though the neon was dark, that first night, move would be dark for between sunset and sunrise. I pushed it back, not harsh, just persistent. It rattled the overhead sign that read Ed's desert stop. In red, like breathing. Like the light in an ocean of shadow. The wind was constant. Desert's own quiet respiration. It moved the dust in small spirals across the concrete. Neon letters. Bays while Ede finished the electrical work. I remember Ed's footsteps on the concrete as he made his final inspections. Soft rubber soles on rough pavement. He walked around the station slowly, checking things. Then he stopped directly beneath me and looked up. The pumps, the small office, the restrooms, it settled into the air around us and seemed to linger even after his truck disappeared down the highway, red around back. Good light, he said quietly. Real good light. His voice was the first human voice I truly heard, deep and careful. Desert, worn, walked away, taillights fading to nothing. I was alone then, really alone for the first time. Just me and my amber glow and the vast silence of the high desert. But I wasn't frightened anymore. Something about Ed's words had given me purpose. Good light. Real good light. I understood then why I was here. The starlight, my electric glow, sun bright. Some why the electricity had found me. Why my filaments burned steady and warm in the darkness. We were all part of I was here to wait, to watch, to be ready. The night deepened around me. Stars emerged, one by one in the clear desert sky. More stars than I had ever imagined possible. Be stretched, prove from horizon to horizon in great sweeping arcs of light, dim, all of them ancient and distant and beautiful. I felt small beneath them. My little pool of amber light seemed insignificant against that cosmic display, but I also felt connected to something larger. All light is related. I began to understand. Be the first hint of dawn that would come in a few hours. To say a vast conversation across darkness. The desert settled into its nighttime quiet, different from the daytime quiet, deeper. Small creatures, going about, more complete, but not empty, never empty. I could sense life moving in the shadows beyond my life. Their ancient business, hunting, hiding, surviving. An owl called from somewhere in the distance. a sound like liquid silver, the owl, the train, the wind, sometimes coyotes singing their wild, poured into the darkness. It called 3 times, then fell silent. Later, much later, I heard the distant rumble of a freight train, miles away, but carrying clearly on the still air. The lonesome wail of its whistle echoed off the mountains and slowly faded. These were the sounds that would become familiar to me over the years to come. Songs to the moon. Sometimes nothing at all but the hum of my own current and the whisper of electricity through wires. The dawn came slowly that first morning, not all at once, but by degrees. Eastern sky lightened from black to deep purple to rose to pale gold. Mountains became visible, first as darker shapes against the brightening sky. Then detail emerged, rocky outcrops, stands of juniper, the suggestion of distant peaks. As the sun climbed, my light became less necessary, a ghost less visible. The amber glow that had seemed so important in the darkness now faded against the gathering daylight. I felt myself becoming transparent, grey, of glass and metal. By it, I didn't mind. I was learning about cycles, light and darkness, need and rest. This was how it would be. P's truck rumbled up too. I would, about the rhythm of day and night, burn through the dark hours, keeping my small watch, then rest while the sun did the work of illumination. Ed arrived, just as full daylight claimed the desert. This station and parked near the small office. He climbed out. Slowly stretched, looked around with satisfaction. Then he looked up at me. Still burning bright, he said. Good. He spent that day finishing the preparations for opening. The neon sign over the office flickered to life for the first time. Ed's dessert. Stop in cheerful. A man got out, stretched, looked around at the pumps were tested. Fuel delivery trucks arrived and filled red letters. Far. The small office was stocked with basics, coffee, the underground tanks, travel-worn but content, who noticed things. The man filled the tank, while the kind of people who candy bar maps of the region. Dusty. I watched it all from my perch above the concrete, learning, waiting, understanding that something was about to begin. The first customer arrived near sunset. Sedan with California plates from highway travel. It pulled up to the pump nearest me with a soft sigh of tires on concrete. Emptiness with something like wonder. Middle of nowhere, he said to his wife as she emerged from the passenger side. Beautiful nowhere, she replied. They were middle-aged, took their time. The sunset was painting the western sky in shades of orange, and woman walked to the edge of the concrete island and looked out at the desert, pink. The first stars were beginning to appear. Look at those colors, she said softly. Look at those stars, he replied. Ed came out of the office to greet them, checked the oil, cleaned the windshield, gave directions to the next town. His movements were practiced, He had done this work before, I realized, in other unhurried places, other times. Nice setup you have, the man said as he paid. Quiet place, Ed replied. Good place. The couple climbed back into their seat. The engine turned over with a comfortable rumble. They pulled away slowly, headlights sweeping across the darkening desert. I watched their taillights disappear down the highway, red dots growing smaller and smaller until they were absorbed by the night. Some just to stand beneath. That was the first of thousands who would stop here over the neon sign my own years to come. Some for fuel, some for rest. The stars, and remember what silence sounded like. Eid locked up the office as full darkness settled around us. Continue to burn. Ed's desert stop. Red letters against black sky. Amber glow strengthened as the last daylight faded. Once again, I was the guardian of this small oasis of light. Another good day, Ed said to the night air. Then he climbed into his truck and drove away. I settled into the familiar rhythm of my current, the steady hum that would become like breathing to me over the years. The pumps stood silent beside me. The office windows reflected my light back in fractured patterns. The desert stretched away in all directions, patient and eternal, to mark this place as safe, as welcoming. To stand, watch through the now called. A train whistle echoed across. This was my purpose. I understood now. To be here when travelers needed light. Dark hours, and keep the darkness from claiming this small island of human presence. Good night, distance. The stars wheeled slowly overhead in their ancient pattern. Learning what it meant to be light and learning what it meant to wait, learning what it meant to serve, ban, and I burned, steady and true, before darkness. Years would pass before I understood the full weight of that service. I learned about loneliness and memory, and the slow passage of time, before I discovered what it meant to outlast the things I was meant to illuminate. And I listened to it all, storing each sound, each sensation, in it whispered through the sagebrush with the sound of ancient, but that first night I knew only purpose, only the simple joy of burning bright, only the satisfaction of a job well begun. The wind stirred the dust around the pumps. It rattled the overhead signs gently. Secrets, whatever place, keep their memories. Dawn would come again. Ed would return. More travelers would stop. The cycle would continue, day after day, night after night, season after season. I was ready for all of it. My filaments glowed warm and steady. My glass housing held the desert. My mounting bracket held me secure against the wind. Air at bay. By, I was a light, just close enough to give I was home. Close enough to make the small pool of amber. I was exactly where I belonged. The darkness pressed close, but not too close. Feel necessary. Feel like hope made visible. My light, meaning below me, feel precious. And in that understanding, I found my peace. My glow softens now as I remember that first night. The wind moves slowly past the pumps. I remember the beginning, and I rest. The years blurred together like headlights on rain-wet asphalt, just enough for me to learn the rhythms of this place, the patterns of light and shadow, the way the concrete expanded in the heat of summer afternoons and contracted in the cold of winter nights, the way the paint on the pumps faded from bright red to dusty rose to every something closer to pink. Ed was always here in those early days, every morning before sunrise, evening after dark, checking the pumps, sweeping the concrete, replacing burned-out bulbs in the office windows. But never me. I burned steady and bright, year after year. My filaments seemed made to last. The travelers came and went in endless procession. Some, I remember, unreliable. She counted coins in her palm under my light, clearly. Others blend together into impressions of movement and voices, and the soft glow of my light on windshields and faces, not sad tears, grateful tears. She stood in my amber pool. There was the young woman who arrived alone on a cold November night. Her car was old. I never saw her again, but I think about her sometimes. Wonder, check in to see if she had enough for fuel. Ed watched her through the office window, then walked out and filled her tank. Anyway, pay me next time through, he said quietly. She cried then, and let them fall freely, catching the light as they traced down her cheeks. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. Ed nodded and walked back to the office. Pew. She climbed into her car and drove away slowly, carefully, nursing the old engine down the dark highway. Wonder if she ever drove past. She made it to wherever she was going again and remembered the kindness of a stranger under an amber light. There was the family with 3 children who stopped on a summer afternoon. The youngest, a boy of maybe 6, wandered away from the car, while his parents dealt with fuel and directions. He stood directly beneath me, staring up at my glass housing with wonder. "How long have you been here?" he asked. His voice was small and clear in the desert silence. His parents didn't hear him. He waited for an answer. I couldn't give, then shrugged and walked back to the car. But the question stayed with me. How long had I been here? Already it was hard to remember. The days and nights flowed together like water. The sagebrush grew a little taller, a little more sparse. The paint, like wind, like the distant sound of traffic on the highway. Desert changed around me, but slowly, so slowly. It was barely the concrete developed hairline cracks that noticeable. On the station building, faded, grew wider with each winter freeze, more careful. The lines around his eyes deepened. There was his hair went. It had aged too, though I didn't notice at first. His movements became more deliberate. From gray to white to nearly gone by, his hands remained steady. His more willing to linger in the small pool of safety I provided. Voice remained calm. His presence remained constant. Still burning bright, he would say each morning, looking up at me, became a ritual, a greeting between old friends. The late-night travelers were the ones I remember most clearly. Something about darkness that made people more themselves, more honest. The trucker who stopped every Tuesday night, regular as clockwork, for exactly 17 minutes, long enough to fuel up and check his logbook. He never spoke much, but sometimes he would stand beneath me and tilt his head back to look at the stars. Perverse face in those moments was peaceful, unguarded. The elderly couple in the Winnebago who spent 3 hours parked here, one December evening, waiting for word about their grandson who had. They sat in folding chairs beside their being in an accident, 2 states away, RV holding hands, saying nothing. My light caught the silver in their head. When the phone call finally came with good news, the worry in their eye, they held each other and cried with relief. The businessman whose expensive car broke down on a rainy night in April. The desert silence worked on him the way it. By dawn, he was sitting quietly on he paced the concrete under my light, angry at first, frustrated, shouting into his cell phone at people who couldn't help him. But people arriving with the deep ache of the long, sometimes whole nights would pass, with no one leaving lighter somehow. Not because of anything Ed did, or gradually the anger faded. Works on everyone, given enough time. The curb, watching the sun rise over the mountains, learning something about stillness. Just me and my light, and the empty pumps, and the highway. Each story wrote itself in light and shadow on the concrete below me. Space, quiet, time to breathe. Temporary dramas played out under my steady glow by their burdens. Set, but because of what this place offered. I learned about loneliness during those years. Bows between travelers, stopping, stretching away in both directions, toward distant cities I would never see. But I also learned that loneliness and solitude are different things. Solitude is chosen, welcomed. It has texture and weight and meaning. During the quiet hours, I could feel myself expanding somehow, growing into the spaces between heartbeats, between breaths, between the moments when human drama briefly illuminated the darkness. The dessert taught me patience, taught me that all things pass. The angry travelers found peace. The frightened ones found courage. The lost ones found direction. Not because the desert changed them, but because it gave them room to change themselves. Ed understood this. I could see it in the way he moved through his daily routines. Unhurried, never rushed. He was simply there when needed, and that was enough. People find what they need, he told a customer once. A woman whose husband had just left her. She was driving west with everything she owned, packed into a small car, crying, confused, asking Ed what she should do. People find what they need, he repeated gently. Sometimes they just need a safe place to stop first. She spent that night parked beside the station. I kept watch over her as she slept in her car. In the morning she seemed different, steadier. She bought coffee in a candy bar and thanked Ed for his kindness. What kindness? He asked. For letting me stay, she said. Wasn't me letting you? Ed replied. This place belongs to everyone who needs it. Preach. She drove away that morning with purpose in her movements. I never knew what became of her, but I like to imagine she found whatever she was looking for. Pure summer heat that made the concrete shimmer like the seasons turned. Winter cold that turned my breath to frost on the inside of my glass water. Housing autumn nights. So clear. The stars seemed close enough to touch. Spring winds that filled the air with dust and the scent of distant rain. I measured time not in days or months, but in a slow accumulation of the way rust began to appear on my mounting bracket. Sometimes these small changes, the way the paint on the station building continued to fade. Cracks appeared in the concrete, growing longer and deeper with each passing year. Ed's movements became slower, more careful. Sometimes he would lean against the pump island for a moment, catching his breath. Always the would forget things, simple things. Where he put his keys, whether he had already swept the concrete, what day it was, but he never forgot to look up at me each morning. Still burning bright, he would say. Always the same words. The cars became more complex, more computerized, but they still, same tone of satisfaction. The customers began to change too. Or maybe I was just getting better at noticing the differences. Fewer people paid with cash, more paid with cards, needed fuel, still needed a safe place to stop. Some nights I would count the stars visible above me. It became a meditation, a way of marking time. But the number changed with the seasons. Always enough to remind me that I was part of With the Moon phaser, but there were always enough to fill my vision. Please spent in something vast and eternal. A photographer stopped one night. A young man with expensive camera, nothing like my warm amber glow, and the hungry look of someone chasing the perfect image of the station, of the pumps, of me. The flash from, or if they just showed surfaces, shapes, the visible parts of our taking pictures. Then, he said, things last as long as they need. His camera was harsh. What are you photographing? Ed asked him. I never saw Americana, the young man said. The dying breed. Places like this won't be around much longer. Ed was quiet for a moment. To last, the photographer packed up his equipment and drove away. By the pictures he took. But I wondered if they captured anything real, anything true, a style that went much deeper than any image could hold. Or maybe I was just becoming more aware of the nights grew longer. Each darkness felt deeper, more complete, but also more precious. These were the hours when I truly came alive, when my purpose was clearest, When the small pool of light I cast seemed most necessary, travelers still stopped, still needed what this place offered, but fewer than before. The highway had been improved, straightened, other routes had been built, faster routes that bypassed this stretch of desert entirely. Ed noticed, but he didn't seem worried. He continued his routines, checking the pumps, looking up at me, each sweeping the concrete, despite everything. My housing, despite the changes and the passing years, mourning with the same words, still burning bright, and and the slow accumulation of wear and weather. I continued to burn, steady and true. My filaments had found their perfect balance, remained intact. My purpose remained clear. On quiet nights, I would listen to the sounds of the desert, the owl calls. They were the distant train whistles, the wind through the sagebrush. More meaning, as if they were trying to tell me that this place same sounds I had heard from the beginning, but they seemed to carry more weight now. Something important about time and change and the way all things. Not tonight. Tonight I would burn, as I always had Dick casting my eventually return to dust, but not yet. Amber light down onto the cracked concrete, keeping watch over the empty pump, waiting for the next traveler who might need what I offered: constancy. A warm light in the darkness that said, without reliability, words that someone cared enough to leave a light burning, was safe, that all travelers were welcome. The wind stirred around the station, gentle. It carried the sense of sage and distance and familiar, like an old friend brushing past to say hello. Time itself. And I listened to it all, storing each moment in whatever place. Lights keep their deepest memories. My glow softens as the memories settle. The wind moves slowly past the pumps. I remember the faces in my life, and I rest. The day Ed didn't come was the day everything changed. Not suddenly. Nothing in the desert happened suddenly, but completely. The way seasons change, the way stone weather, the way stars are born, and I, across distances too vast to comprehend. I waited through that first morning as I always had, watching the east end, feeling my light fade as daylight claimed the desert, listening, skylight, and for the familiar rumble of Ed's truck on the gravel approach. In all the years I had known him, he had never, but the truck never came. By noon I knew something was wrong. Ed was reliable as sunrise, dependable as the wind. Missed a day. Not for weather, not for holidays, not for anything. The gas station sat empty under the blazing desert sun. The pumps stood up like silent sentinels, their displays dark. The office windows reflected the heat in shimmering waves. No customers came. The highway stretched away in both directions, empty except for the occasional truck or car that passed without slowing. I waited. Night fell, and I flickered to life, as I always did. My amber glow pushed, or maybe I was just noticing them more now that the station ancient light that had traveled for years, or back, the darkness. The familiar hum of electricity sang through my filaments, but there was no Ed to look up and say his morning words. No one to check the pumps, or sweep the concrete, or watch over the small island of civilization in the vast desert night. Just me, alone with my light and a silence. We stretched from horizon to horizon in great. The stars emerged, one by one in the clear sky. More stars than usual, it seemed. Below me was truly quiet. We were all alone, outflowing rivers of light. Centuries or millennia to reach this place. I felt connected to them in a way I never had before. Here, all burning our individual fires across the darkness, all waiting for someone to notice, to need what we offered. A coyote cawed from somewhere in the brush beyond the concrete island. Another answered from a different direction. They sang to each other across the emptiness, their voices wild and lonesome and beautiful. I had heard coyotes many times before, but tonight their music seemed meant for me, a welcome into their world of patience and endurance. 3 days passed before Ed's nephew arrived, a younger man with a sadder eye. He walked slowly, same careful hands, but different eyes. He rounded the station, checking things, making notes on a clipboard, stopped directly beneath me and looked up. Still burning, he said quietly. Not Ed's words, not spoken with Ed's satisfaction, but recognition of sorts. He spent the afternoon inside the office, going through papers, making when he came out. His face was set with decision. To me, end of an era. Phone calls. Sorry, old friend, he said to the air. To the station. He locked the office and drove away in Ed's truck. I watched the taillights disappear down the highway with a growing understanding that everything was about to change. I couldn't. The sign came first. A yellow notice posted on the office door. Private from my position. But I knew what it meant. The customers who still occasionally stopped would read it and shake their head. They'll look up at me with something like pity before driving away. The fuel trucks stopped coming. The underground tanks went dry. Pumps displayed nothing but zeros. But I continued to burn, night after night. I cast my amber light down onto the empty concrete. The station was closed, but I remained. A lighthouse with no ships, beacon with no traveler. At first I thought someone would come to turn me off, to flip whatever switch controlled my current. But days became weeks, and weeks became months, and still I burned. Either I had been forgotten, or someone, somewhere, wanted me to keep burning. Believe the latter. The desert began to reclaim the station. Slowly, dust accumulated in corners where Ed's broom no longer reached. Weeds pushed up through the cracks in the concrete. Sand drifted against the pumps in the office, the neon building, creating small dunes that grew larger with each windstorm. Paint peeled from the signs. Metal began to rust more quickly. Letters of Ed's desert stop flickered once, twice, then went dark forever. Burnt I continued to burn. Those that did free, they had no reason to stop at an abandoned station. B, the hollow echo of my own electrical hum in the empty spaces. No, my world grew quieter. Fewer cars passed on the highway, rarely slowed. Need for the services that were no longer offered. I learned new rhythms during those months of solitude. The sound of wind through broken windows. The scratch of tumbleweeds caught against the pumps below. Sometimes animals would venture onto the concrete island. Desert mice. Once, a family of javelinus that snorted and grunted as they the straight lines and right angles that had no equivalent lizards investigated the strange human structure. They seemed puzzled by the artificial surfaces. In their natural world, I watched them all with growing fascination. Without human activity to distract me, I became more aware of the smaller dramas playing out in my pool of light. The territorial disputes between lizards, the midnight hunts of owls and bats, the slow migration of insects drawn to my glow. The seasons turned. Summer heat that cracked the pavement further. Spring winds, that winter cold that froze the water in broken pipes. By scattered debris across the empty lot. Autumn nights so clear, the silence seemed to ring like a bell. I measured time, now not by the arrival and departure of customers, metal the gradual decay of everything around me. Watching paint fade, rust, concrete crumble, glass break, but still lie burn. My filaments remained true. My housing remained intact. My current eye began to float, steady and strong. Whatever system powered me seemed immune. The slow were barely to the neglect that was claiming everything else. Or maybe not immune. Maybe just slower to show the effects. Notice small changes in myself. A slight dimming of my light. Perceptible flicker that came and went. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that I was part of the same cycle that governed everything else. The rust would be visible to casual observation, but I could feel it, beginning of my own decay. The realization should have frightened me, but instead it brought a strange peace. Under pumps, the weeds in the concrete, the gradual return of the desert to its ancient pattern. Nothing lasted forever. Not not the station. Not the travelers who had once found safety in my light. And eventually, not me. But until that time came, I would continue to burn, to cast my amber glow into the darkness, to mark this place as having been important once, as having mattered to someone. The highway began to show its age too. Fewer maintenance crews, more cracks that spread like spider webs across the asphalt. The white potholes, lines faded to gray, then to nothing. Nature was patient, but it never stopped working to reclaim what humans had built. Occasionally someone would stop. Urban explorers with cameras, documenting abandoned places. They would take pictures of the empty pumps, the boarded windows, the faded signs, Some would notice me still, burn in, and seem puzzled by it. Why is that light still on? They would ask each other. No one ever had an answer. They would drive away with their photographs and their questions, leaving me alone again with the wind and the stars and the slow passage of time. I began to dream during the daylight hours. Not sleep exactly, but before. Something like meditation, a drifting state where memories and present awareness blended together into something that felt like prophecy. I dreamed of the desert as it had been before the highway. Endless spaces of sage and sand and silence. Ancient spaces where station, time moved differently. Where change was measured in geological ages rather than human seasons. I dreamed of the future too. The highway grown over with brush, the concrete broken and scattered, the metal rusted to nothing, the desert restored to its original emptiness. But in these dreams, something of me remained. Not the physical structure of glass and metal, but the essence of what I had been. The intention, too. Or maybe decades. It became hard to tell. The abandon, the commitment to keep watch, the simple act of caring, provide light, made manifest in amber glow. Years passed. Stations settled deeper into decay. Windows broke completely. Doors fell from their hinges. The roof of the office building developed holes that let noticeably so. Sometimes I flickered for long. The coyotes came closer to the station at night. The owls, in rain and snow, and the nests of birds. But I continued to burn. Sometimes I went dark entirely, only till my light was dimmer now, seconds before steadying again. In the wave flare back to life after a few minutes or hours. Each time I feared it might be the last time. Each time I was grateful to burn again. The desert around me seemed wilder now, less touched by human presence, perched on the pump handles, desert plants, pushed up through every crack and crevice, slowly but relentlessly breaking apart the artificial surfaces. I found beauty in the decay, in the way morning glory vines covered the broken windows with heart-shaped leaves and purple flowers. The metal of the pumps had oxidized to deep oranges and browns that complemented the desert color, in the way the concrete had weathered to something that almost looked natural. The abandonment had not destroyed this place. It had transformed it into something that belonged to both worlds. Now, the human something new, the world that had created it, and the natural world that was reclaiming it. And I was part of that transformation. No longer just a gas station light, but something more complex. A witness to change, a marker of transition. Faint, a small flame that connected past and future. Artificial and natural, human intention and desert time. Radio static began reaching me sometime during those later years. Signals that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Not commercial broadcasts, but something stranger. Fragments of voices, pieces of music, back electronic whispers that might have been communication, or might have been random noise bouncing off the atmosphere. I learned to listen to this static the way I had once listened to the conversations of travelers, parsing meaning from randomness, finding decades, as if time itself had become unstable in patterns, in chaos. The voices seemed to be speaking across vast distances, despite everything, despite the decay and the abandonment. Not just miles, but years. This forgotten place, his morning greeting. Sometimes I thought I heard Eded's voice in the static, carried across impossible distances. Still burning bright, the static would whisper, still burning bright. Be a small fire that and I was, and the slow failure of my own systems. I continued to cast my amber light into the desert darkness, weaker now, but constant, refuse to be extinguished. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The wind sang. The desert worked its slow magic on through the broken structures. Everything human ambition had left behind. A sentinel, a memory, a promise kept to travelers who, and I, burned on, might never come again. The voices come at 3 in the morning now. Not every night, not predictably, but often enough that I have learned to. They drift through the broken radio in the abandoned office, like listen for them in the spaces between my electrical hum and the desert wind, always static, the sound of distance made audible, then smoke through cracked walls. I have learned this through now, or might have, years of watching rust bloom on metal like desert flower. Static first, fragments of conversations that might be happened decades ago. Voices discussing weather in cities I will never see. Music from eras I only half remember. Emergency broadcasts about disasters that may or may not have already occurred. Time is fluid. Time moves differently in abandoned places. Years of solitude, years of feeling the slow vibration of my own electrical current, growing more irregular, more uncertain. The radio voices speak across that uncertain time, like messages in bottles floating on an electronic sea. Sometimes they seem to be speaking directly to me. Anyone out there? A voice asked last week, or last year. No words except the persistence of my light against here. Still here. I wanted to answer, but I have no voice except the steady amber of my glow. The darkness, the wind has become my conversation partner during these long nights of isolation. It speaks in the language of desert places, the whisper of sand. It tells stories of distant storms and ancient patience, and the that eventually claims everything human hands have against glass. The rattle of loose metal, the hollow moan through broken small pits in the glass, where fractures that spread like frost across my surface structures. Slow work of erosion built. My housing shows the wind's handiwork. Now sand has been driven by countless storms. Red oxide bleeds down their sides. The pumps, green verdigris, spreads across copper fittings, like lichen on scratches that catch and scatter my light in new patterns on cold winter nights. but I still burn. Prickly pear, dimmer than before, their yellow flowers bright against the industrial decay. As they go about that let-in rain and starlight, and the nests of desert more fragile, bare, their flat pads thick but burning. The station below me has become a garden of rust and ruin, stand like abstract sculptures now, their original purpose obscured by layers of oxidation and weather staining. Like tears, stone, its roof, desert, plants, have found footing in every crack and crevice. Cacti grow from the spaces between concrete slabs, with stored water. Barrel cacti have claimed the corners where walls meet pavement, their ribbed surfaces catching and holding my amber light. Like ancient lanterns, pack rats have built cities in the spaces between walls. Bare stick. The office building sags under the weight of accumulated years, has developed holes, birds, houses growing larger and more complex with each passing season. Sometimes I catch the gleam of their eyes in my light, their nighttime business. The highway has grown quiet. Days pass, now without a single vehicle. The asphalt cracks have widened into gaps where grass pushes through. Sagebrush encroaches from both sides, slowly narrowing the roadway. In another decade, maybe two, the highway will be indistinguishable from the desert floor. Just another layer in the geological record of human ambition. I continue to burn. My light has become something different over these years of isolation, more elemental, as if the current flowing through less electric somehow. My filament has learned to speak the desert's older language of stone and time and patience. Sometimes aircraft pass overhead, high altitude flights leaving contrails, a single amber point in the vast darkness, a small signal that dissipates slowly in the thin air. I wonder if my light is visible from that height. Someone once cared about this place enough to leave a light burning. They warn of floods in valleys that exist only in their electronic play songs that might have been popular when Ed was the radio voices speak of storms approaching cities whose names I don't recognize. Memory. When the station was new, when travelers still believed in the young romance of the open road, one voice returns more frequently than others. A night DJ broadcasting from somewhere far away, or somewhen far away. His voice is gravelly and kind, the voice of someone who understands loneliness, who find themselves awake, who speaks to insomniacs and night shift workers and others when the world sleeps. This one goes out to all the lonely lights, he said once, all the beacons, keeping watch in empty places, and the electric hum of my current to create a symphony of the song he played was instrumental, slow and melancholy and beautiful, boom, and mixed with the wind through the drifted through the broken, radio-ruined station. I have become part my light flickers in patterns that abandonment, a lullaby for forgotten things. I have learned to read weather in the behavior of my electrical current when storms approach from hundreds of miles away. My filaments sense the change in atmospheric pressure, mirror the lightning still distant beyond the mountains. Over the desert's early warning system, a barometer of glass and wire. That electricity is older and wilder than human attempts to. The storms, when they come, are spectacular. From my elevated, they remind me that I am not the only light in the perspective. Lightning illuminates the emptiness for miles in all directions. Thunder rolls across the flat spaces like the voices of ancient gods. Rain falls in silver sheets that turn the dust into temporary lakes and rivers. I love the storms, darkness, harness it. That lightning and my amber glow are distant cousins, children of the same elemental force. During the worst storms, my current fails completely. Lightning strikes in those power lines somewhere in the distance and everything goes dark. The darkness that moments I truly understand. Darkness. Not just the absence of light, but the presence of something vast and patient and eternal. Existed before stars. That will exist after they burn out. But always, when the storms pass, my current returns, my filaments warm, my housing glows with renewed amber light. Each time I flicker back to life is a small resurrection, a reaffirmation of purpose in a world that has moved on without me. The animals have grown bolder over the years. Pack rats scurry across the concrete directly below me, their chittering voices adding to the night chorus. Owls perch on the pump handles, their heads swiveling as they once a family of hunt for movement in the shadows beyond my light. Coyotes denned in the ruins of the office building. I watched their pups play in my amber glow, tumbling over each other like domestic dogs, as they didn't fear me. None of the animals do. My light has been here long, enough to become part of their landscape, as natural as moonlight, accepted as the stars. Sometimes I wonder what I look like to them. Do they see the glass and metal of my construction, or something more organic? Do they understand that I am artificial, or have I been here so long that the distinction has lost meaning? The radio picked up a different kind of signal last month. Not voices or music, but data. Electronic noise that pulsed in complex patterns. Computer code, perhaps. Or satellite communication. Or the digital heartbeat of a world that has moved far beyond the simple analog existence of this abandoned place. I listened to the patterns for hours, trying to decode meaning from the but. Electronic noise, more purposeful. As if the machines had learned to speak to it, reminded me of the static between radio stations. The white noise that fills the spaces between human transmissions. Different. Each other in languages their creators never intended. At the pace of plant growth through the thought was both comforting and unsettling. Comforting because it suggested that communication continues even when humans are absent. To vet the infrastructure of connection might outlast its builders. Unsettling because it implied a future where human voices were no longer part of the conversation, but That future feels distant from my amber-lit island of rust and ruin. Here, hairline cracks. That time moves at the speed of erosion. Concrete cracks at the rhythm of seasons and storms, and the slow dance of stars across the desert sky. Mounting, my own decay proceeds at the same deliberate pace. Bracket that holds me has developed stress fracture, grow slightly longer with each thermal expansion and contraction. My glass housing has collected a fine layer of dust that no wind can completely clear. My electrical connections have developed a faint green patina of corrosion. But still, I cast my amber light down onto the broken concrete. Still, I keep my lonely vigil in the desert darkness. The radio ghost DJ spoke again last night, his voice drifting through dimensions of static and time. For those who remember, he said, for those who keep faith with forgotten places. This is the sound of persistence. The song he played had no words, just electronic tones that rose and fell like breathing, like wind. It sounded like the music lights might make if they could sing, like the slow pulse of current through aging, patient, eternal, waiting for the circuits. I listened until dawn, until the sun rose over the mountains, and my own glow faded into transparency, until the radio static faded back into the white noise of a world moving at frequencies I can barely detect. The desert has time, all the time in the world. The desert stretched away in all directions, last traces of human presence to weather away completely. But not waiting. Electronic whispers from a future that exists only in silicon, and I have learned to move at desert time, to measure moments in the each amber reflection on broken glass is a prayer made slow accumulation of rust, to find meaning in the gradual return of this place to its natural state, to understand that my light is not fighting the voices from cities, that darkness so much as dancing with it. Each night I burn is a gift, each flicker of current through my filaments is a small miracle, visible. The wind carries sounds from impossible distances, may no longer exist. Music from radio stations that may be broadcasting from the past, dreams. I listen to it all, store it all in whatever place lights keep their accumulated wisdom. Mix it with the memory of Ed's morning greetings and the faces of travelers who once found comfort in my glow and the steady rhythm of my own electrical song. To hold this is my purpose now, not just to illuminate, but to remember the stories of this place in my amber light, to be a repository of moments, ghost voices, ghost music. Tao would otherwise be lost to the relentless forward motion of time. Be static between stations is full of ghosts. Ghost signals from ghost transmitters broadcasting across ghosts beside a ghost highway that leads to. And I am part of that electromagnetic haunting. A ghost light frequency. The refusal burning in a ghost station. A ghost light tended by destinations that exist only in memory. But ghosts are not nothing. Ghosts are the persistence of care, to let important things disappear completely. The insistence that what the radio static once mattered still matters, even when no one is left to remember why. So I burn on through the endless desert nights. Ghost memories, casting amber shadows for ghost traveler. Never come but deserve to find safety waiting if they do. Remember it all, hold it all in the warm amber space. The wind whispers stories of what was and what might be, carries voices across impossible distances. The stars wheel overhead in patterns older than human language, and I listen to it all, where light becomes memory and memory becomes light. My glow flickers with the rhythm of electronic dreams. The wind carries voices from the static between stars. I remember the songs that machines sing to emptiness, and I rest. The day I began to die was the day I finally understood what it meant to be alive, not dying quickly. Nothing in the desert dies quickly unless it chooses to. Slowly, gracefully, with dignity, but dying the way all things die here. Earned through years of patient service to the larger rhythms of existence. Years, maybe. Time had sometimes strong and steady, as it had always been. Sometimes, but the dimming was accelerating now. Sometimes absent entirely, leaving me dark for hours, as if that suggested final each night. My light seemed, my filaments had been growing dim for months, become fluid in this place where seasons blurred together like watercolors in rain, a little weaker. Each flicker lasted a little longer. The electrical current that had been my life force for decades was growing. The slow chemical processes by which rock, irregular, weak, and uncertain, at a time before surging back with a kind of intensity its walls crumbling back efforts. But even as my light failed, my awareness seemed to expand. Benji, that had been devoted to illumination, was being redirected inward, toward memory, toward understanding, toward some kind of electric frost and heat, and the enlightenment that only came to lights at the end of their service. Peas soon their metal skins flaked away. Pieces of its windows, empty sculptures of rust, and I could feel the desert around me more clearly now. Not just see it in the pool of my amber glow, but sense it. A vast network of root systems beneath the concrete bar. The migrations of small creatures through spaces too small for human attention became sand, became soil, became the foundation for new life. The abandoned station had almost completely returned to the desert. Now, the office building was more ruin than structure, put into the elements from which they had been made. Frames that held nothing but sky and wind, and the occasional bird nest. The pumps had become monuments to oxidation. Time that bore only abstract resemblance to their original purpose. Desert plants grew up through their broken bases, in the wind like the shed scales of some enormous reptile. The concrete was breaking apart more quickly now. Patient work of plant roots had opened cracks that became chasms. There would be only fragments scattered across the desert floor. Human intention slowly returning to dust. I still burned, weakly, inconsistently, to pack more, but with a quality of light that seemed different now. More concentrated, somehow. As if the approach in but the silent darkness had taught me to use each photon more efficiently. Meaning into less energy. All the songs and signals and electronic whispers that had kept me. The radio had been silent for weeks. Whether its circuits had finally failed, or the distant transmitters had gone dark, I didn't know. Was not empty. It was full of the echo of all the voices I had heard over the years. The soft company during the long nights of abandonment. I could see in the quiet. I could hear other sounds more clearly. By the heartbeat of the earth itself, transmitted through bedrock and soil. And the concrete that still held my mounting bracket, the whisper of roots growing, but burning with a kind of brightness that comes from percussion of sand grains bouncing off my housing in the desert wind. My memories had become more vivid as my light grew dim. Ed's face, with perfect clarity, every line. Not as bright as before, not with the steady confidence of my thee, every expression of satisfaction. As he checked my operation each morning, I could hear his voice as clearly as if he were standing beneath me right now. Still burning bright, he would say. Still burning bright, every face, and I was prime years. Understanding, from acceptance, from the peace that settles over all things when they finally know their place in the larger pattern. I remembered every traveler who had ever stopped here, all of illuminated by my amber glow, the worried ones who found comfort, lost ones who found direction, the angry ones who found peace. Them part of the story I had been writing with light for decades. The young woman counting coins. The family with the curious boy who asked how long I had been here. To the businessman whose expensive car broke down. Elderly couple waiting for news about their grandson. The photographer looking for dying Americana. They were all still here, in some way. Their stories preserved in whatever place. Lights keep their most important memories. Their moments of need and hope and human connection. Immortalized in amber. Each dawn the nights were longer now. Or maybe I was just more aware of them. Each darkness felt like a sea I had to cross with failing strength. Kept crossing those dark seas one flicker at a time. Felt like a shore I might not reach again. But I kept burning. New sounds reached me in those final months. Not radio signals, but something deeper. By electromagnetic song of the planet itself. Radio waves bouncing off the earth. Solar radiation creating aurora in my failing current distant skies. The electronic chatter of satellites passing overhead like a dying light singing farewell to the electric age that had given artificial stars. I was part of that electromagnetic symphony now, adding its own small note to the vast electronic chorus of modern existence. Me, life, and purpose. Emergency beacons, on sometimes in the deepest part of night. I could sense other lights burning in distant places. Traffic signals in empty cities. Mountain peaks. Navigation lights on ships crossing dark seas. We were all connected by the simple act of pushing back darkness. All part of the same, put ancient to provide guidance and safety and hope. The thought comforted me as my own light grew weaker. I was not alone in dying. All lights eventually dim. All filaments eventually fail. But the mission continues. Somewhere new lights are being born. New beacons are taking up the watch. The bolts that held me to the pole were loose and rusty. My mounting bracket was failing now. The stress fractures had grown into visible cracks. Too soon the desert wind would claim me entirely, send me tumbling to the broken concrete, below where I would shatter into 1,000 amber fragments. Not tonight. Tonight I would burn, as I always had, with, but not yet, whatever strength remained, with whatever purpose I could still serve. A coyote, called from somewhere in the darkness beyond my fading light. Another answered from a different direction. Their voices wild and free, and utterly at home, in this place where human ambition had briefly flourished and then returned to dust. B had been here before the highway, before the station, before me. They would be here long after all traces of human presence had weathered. Their songs were the true music of this place, ancient and eternal away, and unchanged. To have shared, I felt honored to have been their temporary companion. This small patch of desert with creatures who understood something about persistence that humans had never quite learned. Something about the patience required to survive in empty places. Something about finding meaning in the simple act of continuing. My light flickered again, longer this time. The darkness pressed closer, but when the current returned, it brought with it a clarity I had never known, understanding that transcended the simple binary of on and off. Before, light and dark, existence and emptiness. I was not separate from the darkness. I was part of it. The way stars are part, above the space between them. The way silence is part of sound. The way endings are part of beginnings. The desert had taught me this over the decades of my service. That all boundaries are temporary. That all categories are human constructions imposed on a reality that knows no such divisions. That light and darkness are partners in a dance older than language. My current surged one final time, Allah's brilliant flaring that cast my amber glow farther than it had reached in years. For a moment, the abandoned station was visible in my light. The rusted pumps, the broken concrete, scattered with desert plants, and the crumbling office. Tracks of small animals. It looked beautiful in that final illumination, not tragic or abandoned, or forgotten, but transformed, returned to something larger and more permanent than human intention. Part of the desert's own slow breathing. Part of the planet's patient work of taking all things back into itself. Then the current faded. My filaments cooled, brove the amber glow that had been my voice for so many years dimmed to nothing. But I was not gone, not entirely, been in the darkness. I could still feel the desert around me, could still sense the vast network of existence of which I had been part, could still remember every night, every moment of light I had cast, every traveler I had guided, had kept watch. No glass housing, no mounting bracket or metal pole. Light, those memories, were light of a different kind. Light that needed no electricity. That existed in the space between heartbeats, in the pause between words, in the silence between radio signal. The wind moved through the ruins of the station, stirring dust, carrying the scents of sage and distance and time itself. It was rattling, not amber anymore, but transparent as air, not fixed in place to visit every forgotten station. Every lonely light still burning in loose metal. The same wind that had always been here. The same wind that would always be here. But the routes it had followed were older than asphalt. Older than, and in that wind I found my new voice. Not electric anymore, but elemental. Anymore, but free to move across the entire desert. Abandoned place, empty locations. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The same stars I had watched from my pole for decades. But now I could see them differently. Not as distant lights, but as companions, fellow travelers in the bay where the paths that water had carved. That wind had electromagnetic sea that connected all illuminated things. The highways stretched away in both directions, cracked and overgrown, but still faintly visible in the starlight. Poof! Someday soon it would disappear. Entirely human travel. Warned that animals had walked for millennia. All roads led somewhere. All lights eventually went out. All stories eventually ended. Plah. It was full of everything now. But the darkness that followed was not empty. Had come before, full of memory and meaning, and the patient promise that new lights would eventually ignite. New stories would begin. New part of the darkness that held all past, part of the space that waited for new ones to bloom. Travelers would find their way across the vast spaces between one moment of illumination and the next. A whisper that said to I was part of that promise. Now, lights. The wind carried my new voice across the desert. Other dying lights. You are not forgotten. Your service mattered. Your light was seen. Bar. And to the travelers still out there somewhere, moving between one safe place and the next. The way is marked. The path continues. Someone is always keeping watch. The desert breathed around the ruins of the station, inhaling the last traces of human presence, exhaling the patience required for all things to return to their source. And in that breathing, I found my final peace. My glow fades to starlight and memory. The wind carries all voices home. I remember everything, and I am still and rest.